My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
I'm Dave Momper, and today's leadership quote comes from William Ernest Henley and his poem Invictus, which goes as follows. Out of the night that covers me, black is the pit from pole to pole. I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged the punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
Thank you for listening to the Leader Assistant podcast.
Hi, it's episode 49.
And here's your host, my dada.
Hey friends, we have a unique episode today talking about listening intelligence. So get your listening hat on and pay attention and really soak up what my guest Dave Momper has to say about our listening intelligence and how to be a better listener. But before we dive in, I wanted to share a quick note about some friends of mine who run a company called Spoonful of Comfort. So Spoonful of Comfort was on Shark Tank a few years ago. They have care packages customized with sensational soups, classic cookies, and accessories to make a big impression for any occasion. It's a unique way to nourish customer and employee relationships. So if you have staff or executives who recently had a baby or recently graduated, got their master's, maybe there's some sympathy and grief packages that you need to send for people who lost a loved one, or perhaps they lost a pet, or any sort of occasion where there's sympathy and care that you want to share with your team members and family members, and then clients. So again, Spoonful of Comfort provides custom home-style meals by mail, and they're beautifully packaged and always appreciated. They actually sent me one when I was sick a few months ago, and my kids actually enjoyed the soup and the rolls and the cookies, and they usually are very, very picky and don't like any soup. So I was very appreciative. But anyway, if you want a warm, personal, meaningful care package customized to the occasion, Spoonful of Comfort is definitely worth checking out. So you can learn more at spoonfulofcomfort.com/leader assistant. That's spoonfulofcomfort.com/leader assistant. And I got to hang out with the CEO, Marty, and in their marketing team with Anne, and they're just great, great ladies who really are passionate about taking care of people. And yeah, just hope you can check them out at spoonfulofcomfort.com/leader assistant. All right, let's jump into today's interview. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Leader Assistant Podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and I'm with Dave Momper from Thrival Concepts. How are we doing, Dave?
Doing great. How are you doing, Jeremy?
Hanging in there, man. Hanging in there. Just excited to chat with you about listening.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
So let's, before we get too deep in the listening stuff, let's talk about your very first job. What was your very first job?
I was trying to think of all the little jobs I had, but I suppose the first job where I actually had to sign like paperwork to become an employee was working at an auto body shop in high school. And, I was in charge of just the menial stuff, like keeping the place clean and organized, and kind of an extra set of hands around the shop, cleaning things up, filing paperwork, that kind of work. So I guess that world is all about attention to detail and kind of craftsmanship. And I suspect I brought those things along with me a bit, I'd like to think.
Nice. So how did you manage to go from auto body shop to becoming a coach?
Yeah, it hasn't been a straight and narrow path by any means. And technically, for the last chunk of my career, I've been in sales and in business development roles nearly my whole career. So, but in different capacities. But and in a way, we're all kind of in sales. But in particular, after a number of things early on in my career, about a little over 10 years ago, I was an account executive for this leadership consulting firm out of Boulder, Colorado. And I went through a lot of the training they provided so that I could then speak firsthand about the offering when I was calling on prospects and managing the existing clients. And I was really struck by the nature of that work, right? They were focused on helping executive level leaders to be awesome, productive human beings. And I remember really committing to myself that one day I wanted to coach and mentor, inspire people for a living. In a way, I've really been coaching all my career, supporting and mentoring my colleagues and my employees. And then I began formally coaching leaders full time in early 2016 when I launched Thrival Concepts. So
how does one get people to pay them to coach?
Yeah, I mean, the nature of a coaching role in, I suppose, in my capacity as a formal coach, my job is to help people uncover the obstacles and kind of issues that aren't necessarily available right on the surface. And so my job is to ask really important questions or high value questions, and then to really listen to that person like they've never been listened to before. That capacity of showing up for people is available to really anyone and all of us. But my duty as a coach, reason people pay for coaching typically is they have a desire to go from a certain place where they're at right now, point A, and to navigate to a particular point B. And it's the coach's duty and say number one responsibility to help them see what point B is, to uncover the things that they inherently know themselves about kind of navigating that path, and in a sense be that sounding board, right? A coach is a sounding board. No coach has, say, all the answers, versus some people might have a particular expertise. In a way, some of my work is definitely consulting work where I have a particular expertise. But as a coach, my job is to extract the insights of my client and let them see the new insights for themselves. And that, in some cases, is invaluable for people.
That's great. So you're focused, or some of your main focuses are communication and listening. And so let's talk a little bit about the practice of listening. What do you kind of focus on, or what's kind of your bread and butter when it comes to what the practice of listening is, or how you help people with it?
Sure. Think of the act of communication. It's half speaking, half listening, or it's 50-50 in the sense that those are the two components, but depends on the nature of the interaction or the dynamic. Sometimes we're doing all the speaking, and that's appropriate, and sometimes we're doing all the speaking and we really should do more listening. Generally, we're listening more than we're speaking in terms of the role we play in our interactions, but we're not necessarily even retaining everything we're hearing or listening to. So the practice of listening is critical because we treat speaking as this skill set that can be honed and developed, and we neglect listening in that capacity. So my objective with my clients is to help them approach listening as a skill set, right? Treat it as a set of disciplines that we can practice. And if we practice those, it allows us to really treat listening as a strategic business function, and one that we can incorporate as individual leaders into our own, say, daily practices, our communication style, but then also a leader or a business function that we can really incorporate into our protocols and systems as an organization, right? As teams and as an organization. So the practice of listening is really the approach to treat listening like a skill set. And then that's fueled by listening intelligence, which is really this framework that has been designed around listening, or that has been defined around listening, that allows you to see that listening is this skill that one can practice, that one can hone, and really, in a way, master over time. So the practice of listening really comes into effect when you have awareness of the unique ways that you're listening to and for information. And that's the echo listening model that you and I have discussed. Listening intelligence is the model, or is the awareness, and the model allows the awareness. And I'm typically working with executives and senior level leadership in maybe a workshop or perhaps a team offsite, and guiding them through an experience all around leadership communication. Meaning, what does it truly mean to listen like a leader? And the practice of listening is one key component of that work that I focus on.
So it's interesting because, you hear a lot more about, as you mentioned, skills and techniques on public speaking, or how to use your words, or how to speak or present. And you don't hear as much about how to absorb and listen. So I'm excited to kind of dive deeper into this.
Sure.
So, okay, so you talk about kind of one of the things we've chatted about as we've had a couple phone calls and gotten to know each other. There's kind of common things that make listening challenging. So maybe walk through those. I think you said there's 6 common things that make listening challenging.
Right. Yeah, I call these the 6 ongoing human factors that challenge productive and present listening. And after working specifically around the act of listening and how it equips leaders, for about 18 months, I've been focused on that. And then over the course of my work with Rebel Concepts, it's been, say, a little bit wider leadership development initiatives. But in the past 18 months, these have shown up consistently. And if there's other ones out there, I'd love to hear them. But I point these out for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, just know that listening is a challenging thing to do. And it's not about being a perfect listener, right? We talk about being good listeners and bad listeners. We're all subject to the challenge of being a good listener because of these common themes. And then there's also a little bit of, it's important to be aware that everyone is susceptible to these. So anyone you're interacting with potentially is faced with these same challenges. And so the act of listening, as important as it is, it eludes us at times. And to give each other a little bit of almost grace and generosity because of this. But so with that said, the first one is that our attention is a limited resource. And you might remember growing up as a kid, people would tell you to pay attention. That at least happened in my childhood. Pay attention. They tell you to listen. They tell you to pay attention. They never really actually explained what that meant. But think of your attention as something that you truly do pay, meaning you only have a limited amount of it and you're paying your attention down. So you're, in a sense, you want to invest your attention. But back to the actual challenge, our attention is this limited resource, and there's distractions and obligations everywhere in our world that are vying for that attention, right? Think of all the different advertising that's out there, all the different content that's out there, all the different channels channels that people can get in touch with us via, or that we can interact with to get information and data. So number one, our attention is a limited resource. And then the second one, think about for yourself. We each have a unique set of purposes, concerns, and circumstances. So my set of purposes, concerns, and circumstances sometimes has me fully engaged and listening. Sometimes it has me distracted or worried or excited. And everyone in the moment, in any given moment, is potentially affected by their purposes, their concerns, their circumstances in life, and it pulls them away from that present moment, makes listening challenging. Number three is all about how we carry around unconscious biases as human beings. And that's not necessarily bad, but it does affect the way we look at the world. And so sometimes the way when we're listening based on certain biases we have, we may check out or we may make conclusions. We're just not truly present and listening to the information that's coming before us. Because of our biases, we're jumping to conclusion in a sense. The fourth thing is that we all have biological reactions or bioreactions, right? These are reactions to perceived threats that at one point helped us survive and still do in a sense. But today, in our kind of present day modern culture, there's still threats that we perceive as threats or situations that we perceive as threats that cause us to either fight, flight, freeze, or appease, right? So we're either showing up and kind of confronting those threats or those things, or we're fleeing the scene, or we're kind of freezing and we're just find ourselves kind of trapped in the moment maybe, or we try to appease in the moment. So we're all subject to these things too. These are the reactions of the amygdala in our brain, which is assessing threat at all times, and kind of it's the security mechanism of our brain, and it's constantly being triggered, and it distracts us or pulls our attention away from the present moment. Number five is that we all have this bias towards action. And I say we all, I guess that's a little bit general, but there is a bias towards action in business. We know that we need to seize opportunity, and there's someone always behind us trying to overtake us in the market, or competition is this real thing. So there's a absolute sense of business urgency in all we do, and a bias towards action, which is technically a healthy thing from my perspective. But knowing that that's there, it comes at potentially a cost that we are not slowing down and listening deeply to all the information available. We might be neglecting some, and to just be aware that at times that bias towards action may be hindering us. And then number six is the most human of them all, is that we really want to have a voice in this world. As individuals, we seek to have a voice in this world. I think it's a bit fair, but maybe it's debatable, but the contribution we make, right, the impact we have, we typically think our voice is the greatest contribution. And I just wonder about how listening can cause a greater impact on your interaction. How well are you listening, or in what ways are you listening? And is that potentially your superpower as a professional, to influence, inspire people through the act of listening more than just our voice? But we all want to be heard. We all want to be heard, and in a sense, that makes listening to others challenging at times. So those are the six.
Wow, those are great. So so those are the challenges, those things that kind of get in our way to, listening well. And you said before, high value listening when we chatted. And so maybe on the flip side, what is high value listening? That way we can kind of counteract the challenges that you just listed with some healthy ways to listen?
Sure. Yeah, almost the contrast of poor listening. I want to even invite people to think about listening differently. It's really not about good listening versus bad listening, which that's simply, are you paying attention or not? And if you're not ever paying attention, or if people around you aren't paying attention, that's definitely bad listening. And the shift to being present in the moment and fully committed to that interaction is step one, right? But think of what, on the contrast of poor listening, high value listening is where the objective is to be truly in the moment listening to your fellow human being. And you can really imagine this in customer service-based roles when you're trying to actually build, say, trust and rapport with a prospect or a client. This goes for really any and every interaction in our business systems. But imagine that when people actually feel heard, when they feel understood and valued and then respected, that's high value listening. It's when you create the ability for other people to feel heard, understood, valued, and respected. And that leads to trust and confidence between the people in that interaction, and allows for, say, problem solving, more risk taking, innovation, agility, and flexibility. And then the major objective is productivity. And what I want you guys to think of, for those listening, is high value listening is actually deeply, truly listening, right? It's listening intentionally. And I like to say, listen first, on purpose, with purpose. So if you can imagine, just for anyone listening, and Jeremy yourself, think of any one-on-one relationship, whether it's intimate or romantic, or a friendship. You think of a team of people. Think of an organization interacting with its users or its clients. When we listen and interact with the other party involved in a way that they feel legitimately heard, understood, respected, that's where we unlock the magic of that relationship and the potential to actually get great work done together. And at the end of the day, what's the point of a team? It's to actually be stronger together than separately, and to be connected, to be able to count on each other. And that goes for, say, a pair of strategic partners, two people, a team of people, the whole organization, perhaps. So high value listening really is about intentional listening to hear people where they're actually coming from.
So what's interesting to me about all of this, there's several things interesting, but I work at an artificial intelligence software company, and so we talk a lot about, and in my work with EAs, we talk a lot about AI and the future of work, and we talk about emotional intelligence as being one of the key kind of differentiators between us human assistants and human team members versus the artificially intelligent software and programs that are kind of taking more and more tasks from us. So how this whole listening intelligence is fascinating to me as well, and I feel like it ties to or falls under the bucket of emotional intelligence. But how would you say listening intelligence interacts with or relates to emotional intelligence?
Great. So maybe a little bit of a definition around listening intelligence for some context. Listening intelligence is the awareness that we are all processing the world, or that we're all listening to and for different information. And it's not just the conceptual awareness. The echo listening model really affords a model for us to see the act of listening through a new lens. And it's being aware that you're listening and processing information in a particular way that is unique to you. It's a habit a cognitive pattern of kind of how you process and prioritize information. So it's a habitual communication style, the way you listen, and you're able to see that in that tool, the Echo Listening Profile, and then you're able to have greater awareness of others in general through that model, that everyone you encounter, everyone that you work hand in hand with, they potentially listen in a unique way through this framework. And then, of course, if you can get specifically aware of their particular habits and their style as a team or as a collective, that can be pretty powerful. So listening intelligence is the awareness that we're listening to information in a unique way, and that opens up a new way of approaching listening. The act of being intentional listeners is calling on our emotional intelligence. It's demanding of us to be more self-aware, to actually take inventory of the tendencies we have in terms of how we listen and how that impacts our interactions. And then, say, the second component of emotional intelligence might be compassion, right? To have compassion for other people, to listen intentionally calls upon that compassion, to say, I'm going to put myself in not their specific shoes, but just know that they're on their own, they're in their own world. They probably have good intention of being highly productive human beings, and I'm going to hold space for them in a compassionate way. The third component in emotional intelligence that I think of is conviction, almost like clarity of purpose and being intentional with kind of your gifts or your one life to live. And so you're showing up on purpose and listening on purpose with that conviction facet of EQ. And then ultimately empathy. Empathy within emotional intelligence is maybe the most important thing that's being called upon when you're listening, because you're bringing a sense of curiosity to the conversation. If you're truly listening, if you're listening on purpose, you're imagining the person and what they potentially are thinking or going through, or you're just giving space for them to act. You know that their take is a unique take, and you have empathy to the degree that you can understand that that wherever they're coming from, that happens to be where they're coming from. So I think the correlation is, anything with the word intelligence after it these days is really implying greater awareness around that subject. So, emotional intelligence is greater awareness of how our feelings and our emotions affect our behaviors and the experiences we have of life. And then listening intelligence is awareness that we're all processing the world differently, and to be really high value listeners, it demands that we have greater self-awareness, greater compassion, greater conviction, and greater empathy, or that we utilize them in a greater way or in a deeper way.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about the profile real quick. So basically, this Echo model and profile, there's kind of an assessment, very, very similar to like a personality test or a values or a strengths finder, or similar, where you have a series of questions and you go through and you ask or you answer them honestly, and then that kind of takes their years and years of research and the algorithms and whatnot and spits out a profile for you. And so when I did that, it was very interesting. There's different types of the listening Echo profiles. So why don't you talk about we'll actually have this image, this kind of 4-piece pie chart in the show notes. If those of you listening want to kind of look at this while you're listening and while Dave walks through it real quickly, but talk about the 4 different, I can't remember if these are types or profiles or styles. I don't know, Dave, you can kind of talk about what they are, but briefly go over those 4, and then I'll kind of dive in a little bit more on how I experienced the test and what I got out of it.
Sounds good. Okay, so the echo listening model is a framework or a model put around listening as a way to describe the act of listening in such a way that lets us talk about it differently frankly, in a real way. We're now talking about listening differently than when we were able to before. Historically, it's more rhetorical. We probably experience people talking about how listening wasn't happening, or it was negatively affecting a meeting, or no one's listening throughout the organization. But what to do about it seemed to kind of elude us. People could commit to being better listeners, but that really just meant be more present. So this model is a way for us to shift the paradigm and approach listening as a skill set. And so the model is 4 different specific habits that we each deploy, but we're putting them in a different preference or order, in a sense, right? So imagine yourself in an interaction, in a meeting with a group of people, one-on-one, whatever it may be. Perhaps it's a presentation. A bunch of information is coming into your purview, into your world, and go back to those six challenges and keep them in mind. But imagine that we're each putting our attention on a subset of that information, and kind of putting we're prioritizing a subset of that information, or we're seeking out a particular subset of that information. And the model puts 4 habitual categories out there for us to kind of think about as filters that we apply to the information we're processing. So the first one is connective. So the first habit in the ECHO model is connective listening. The second one is reflective listening. The third one is analytical listening. And the fourth one is conceptual listening. So quickly, and we can get into as much detail as you'd like, but connective listeners are hearing the information that's being presented, and they are seeking out or putting their attention on, they're filtering for the information that relates to other people. So connective people or connective listeners are first and foremost worried about, concerned about, thinking about how the information impacts and relates to other people. On the flip side, reflective listeners are seeking out or filtering the information. Of all the information coming in, they want to put their attention on the information that relates to them, their duties, themselves. They're not in a selfish way per se, but how it impacts their responsibilities or relates to the world they know, the experiences they have, or the archive of knowledge that they have to date. So reflective is a little bit more internal. Connective is a little bit more external. And then analytical listeners are seeking out or filtering out of all the information. They're filtering for the details and the objective data, right? They want to know the facts of the matter. Of all the information coming in, that's what they're putting their attention on. And then conceptual listeners, they're seeking out information that affords big possibilities and new ideas. They're kind of looking for the big picture that lies within the information they're hearing. And I really like to think of these as filters. So we're applying these filters, each of us, we're all using all 4 filters, but what we do is we approach most of our interactions in a habitual way in terms of how we're listening. We approach the way we're thinking about information, the way we're listening to and for information, kind of in a habitual way, and we're going to start with one of these as a preference, and then perhaps there's a second one that's the subsequent filter we apply, and then a third, and then a fourth. The ECHO profile ends up showing you the hierarchy of the preferences you have, and the order in which you're applying these filters to your interactions. And it reveals to you kind of what you think about and what you care about, which you probably already know, to a degree inherently, but this elevates your awareness in terms of the listening habits you have. With each of them, I think there's a couple important things to kind of point out. The way we listen isn't an assessment methodology to judge good or bad listening. It's really about heightening your awareness that you listen in a particular way and that it's a habit. And it lets you ask a new set of questions. It's like each unique kind of combination of our listening habits affords us certain strengths and potentially certain challenges. And the Echo report will reveal those. Categorically, connective has its own strengths and challenges, conceptual, reflective, analytical, so on and so forth. But for each profile, it shows as this type of listener, this is when you're at your best. These are circumstances that might show up and make your interactions challenging. And at the end of the day, it's a self-awareness tool. It lets you see yourself through a new lens and understand what it really means to be a listener in your shoes. I think the next step with the tool, if you think of the Echo listening model as a tool, the way that other people, or the way that people listen, is there's certain cues that we're all giving off. And so the idea is to then heighten your own individual awareness, but then also heighten your awareness around the different ways other people are listening and what cues are available to help you become more aware of your fellow human being, or the executive you're working with, or the team that you're on. And so we can begin picking up on certain body language related to each of the listening habits. And it's different than the body language we have when we're in our speaking modes. So each listening style has tendencies of body language that is associated with it. And so that's a cue. And you can really think about the question someone's asking and what that suggests. Do they care most about analytical factors, conceptual factors, reflective factors, or connective factors? And you can begin to kind of deduce that this is what's most critical to that person. If I'm truly listening to them, I can actually pick up on what they care about most based on how they're listening. And that allows us to actually get to the root of whatever the opportunity is between us. So I also then ultimately use this within teams or between key executives so that they can understand each other, and in particular understand each other's listening styles and habits, so you can see the way that each other's styles have potential conflict or potential opportunity to leverage or to be aware of, and what to do about it, right?
So this is pretty helpful tool, and I found it helpful. And what's interesting to me though is, even as I listen to you describe it, and I'm sure a lot of people listening right now to this episode are probably in this category of analytical as well. I'd actually be interested to see kind of the percentages of, if all the EAs in the world took this profile test, what the percentages of each one would be. Because EAs, I don't know, I would kind of bet that EAs fall under the analytical often. I don't know how often, but that's what I fell under. And even just listening to you describe it now, like I'm reading the challenges of the analytical listener, and basically it just says things like can discard information that could be valuable and miss others' feelings, can shut off complete interactions. So like I found myself just only listening for what applies to me. And that just doesn't really apply to me, so I'm going to just check out. And one of the things that the profile kind of gave me as like an action item, which I liked about this one, is pretty simple, 10-page report, but real clear and not like a long read or anything. And there was the action page that said 5 insights you can immediately put into practice. And one of the for my listening style, And one of the insights was demonstrate your interest in people as well as in the details. And I've kind of been known to worry too much about the data and be kind of non-emotional or non-emotive in conversations or in meetings, and like been accused of not caring about the people. And so it encouraged me to use my body language, voice, use eye contact to show engagement and just demonstrate that I'm interested in the people, not just the things they're saying. So anyway, I thought it was a very helpful takeaway, and I think just showed how, this tool, I could take something away right away and apply this tool. And so anyway, all that to say, as we transition into talking about assistants and their executives, I see, as I went through this profile, I could kind of pinpoint what I'm pretty confident the style of listening my executive is. And then I was able to read the strengths and the challenges for their style and start to think, oh, you know what, maybe if I communicate this way, it would, he would maybe listen better or be more engaged, and it'd be more helpful for our partnership. So anyway, what would you say to assistants or even executives listening? Like if they're thinking, oh, this is just another test, why should they care what their listening style is?
Well, I hope no one's necessarily thinking that. But I'll tell you, there's thousands of assessments out there, and there's so many different categories of assessments, as you noted: strengths, personality, behaviors, the motivating, motivating strengths. There's all sorts of stuff, but this really is one of the, if not the only assessment or kind of model around listening. And the distinction, I suppose, or the power of it is that it's the most fundamental thing. Listening to each other, right? Truly listening to each other is so darn important. But we treat it like we treat it with a bit more. Let's hope that we're listening rather than let's listen intentionally. And this shifts all of that, if you will. So with that said, I suppose the particular opportunity, whether it's between an executive and an executive assistant or a team of people, as you just noted, it prompts you in your report. There's a couple key things that you can do to actually show up with a little bit more flexibility in your style and maybe a little bit more awareness of who you are and who other people are, so that there's an opportunity to be more collaborative. Imagine if we all showed up just rigidly the way we are and never gave, any ground, right? It's just constant friction and tension in our interactions. This allows us to see ourselves kind of objectively and see the habits we have, and then to ask a new set of questions. You get to ask yourself, is the way that I'm listening helping or hindering my desired outcomes with respect to my interactions with and you can list off whoever might be most critical, but certainly in the executive assistant relationship, extended but direct team that surrounds you. And in essence, the ultimate goal would be that you and your fellow executive, in your case, Jeremy, your fellow executive, both have awareness of each other and understand that if I really want someone to listen to me because I need them to, that's maybe their role. The best way to get others to truly listen to you is to truly listen to them first and foremost. And Stephen Covey has this great quote, or it's habit number 5 of his 7 habits of highly effective people. And seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. And that's really the magic. And this shows us that other people are processing the world in their own unique way. And if you can show up with a sense or even a duty of curiosity to learn about them and what motivates them or what problem they need solved or how they tick, listening with that intention, and then perhaps a shared objective, which could be like, say, the purpose of the organization or the mission or vision of the team. If you're listening on behalf of that together, it just changes the paradigm of the relationship. People can bring, in my work, I've seen executive teams who go through an engagement where we're using this tool to learn, and kind of, it's a team building tool in a sense. It's certainly a communication tool. It opens up a new commitment to communication, but we realize we actually all need each other. You shouldn't necessarily change your ways, Jeremy, based on your report. It's not necessarily prompting you to be drastically different or to modify your behavior dramatically. What it's saying is you should show up the way you show up, and everyone else can show up the way they show up. If you understand each other and are aware of each other and each other's habits, then your differences become your potential power together. Oftentimes our differences, when they show up, and especially in terms of what we consider important and how that affects our listening, our differences end up leading to tension, chaos, frustration, people defending their ideas, maybe a disruption in executing on an idea, just people generally misunderstanding each other. So our differences, they derail us all the time. But potentially our differences are our superpower in a sense. Like when you can actually see the cognitive diversity of a team and identify the opportunities and the potential conflicts or challenges, you can actually draw on each other differently. You can count on each other differently. You see how, in a sense, you need, Jeremy, for you in particular, you might need someone with a little bit more of a connective listening approach, thinking on behalf of others to kind of get your back. But that relationship can't exist until you see them in a kind of a generous light and they see you in a generous light, and see how that you both need each other, right? There's some synergy there afforded in that awareness. But until that awareness exists, our differences, they throw us off all the time, one-on-one and in groups. And I suspect you can relate to that, and people listening can relate to that as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great, man. I think I've definitely got a lot to think about, and I think the listeners have a lot to think about and dive deeper and do some research on this. So as we wrap things up, and it's kind of a lot to go through, and you do sessions with teams that are multiple days, and there's a lot to dig into and dive into. What's kind of a few things that my listeners can take away? And if they don't remember anything else, they just remember these few things. What's something you can share?
Sure. I'd say there's three particular disciplines, and I say disciplines, on purpose. Just think of them as disciplines. Everything we do that's a habit is the product of the disciplines that reinforce that habit. And if we want to shift our habits in any way, in particular with respect to how we listen, these are three things I think serve us really well. The first is to invest your attention. Really look at it as an investment, and think about, of all the people that you're interacting with, who must you invest your limited resource, being your attention, into? And it's an active and ongoing choice and decision to make, because and it could change in each and every moment, I suppose. But the point is to take an active role in asking that question. Who do I invest my attention into? Right. So the first discipline is to invest your attention. The second is whomever is worth investing your attention into, if you've deemed that they're worthy of your attention, kind of a funny way to say it, but that you're investing your attention in that person. The next step or the next discipline, and you can bring this with you in all your interactions, no matter who you're interacting with, but it's listen to learn. And I like that because it's a bit of a alliteration and a mantra. So listen to learn. Bring a sense of curiosity to your interactions. We have a tendency to want to speak up and have a voice. We have a tendency to want to listen to respond. We have a tendency to maybe not even listen at all. And so if you put a bias on listening, first and foremost, the name of the game to do so is to listen to learn. Ask yourself, what can I learn about this person or from this person that's essential information relative to my duty and my responsibility or our common purpose. But what can I learn about this person or from this person that I didn't know yet? And be committed to gathering that insight before moving on. So listen to learn, almost put a bias on listening before action. And then the third one is learning the power of questions and asking high-value questions. There's a great book. If there's any recommendation on a book nod, it would be "Questions Are the Answer." The author is escaping me right this moment, but "Questions Are the Answer," which implies that we're usually as leaders or as human beings, we might be inclined to think we have to have all the answers, or that we have to have our contribution must be a statement or a declaration, or our contribution is our voice. But in a really, really beautiful way, the secret to solving problems is in the questions we pose, or the secret to connecting with other people is often in the questions we pose. So asking high-value questions, which involves asking insightful questions that you might have the answer or see the answer, but you ask your counterpart or the person you're interacting with. You ask them a question which lets them see it, or which lets them see a new possibility, right? So insightful questions, clarifying questions that allow you to kind of acknowledge where someone's coming from, but ask them to say more about it, to get deeper, to kind of go a layer deeper to the root of the issue or to the essence of what's at stake, right? And then often open-ended questions. The point of listening is to gather essential knowledge. It's not necessarily to make a conclusion immediately. And so asking open-ended questions to just actually afford that space for someone to continue to process the issue at hand. So in summary, the three disciplines: invest your attention. Once you've invested your attention, listen to learn. And then if you're in the spirit, or if you're in the space of listening to learn, ask high value questions as your MO.
Awesome. Well, Dave, thanks so much for your time. Let's kind of share how folks can reach out to you and find you online, and then also just how we can support what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for asking. The best way online with respect to my professional endeavors is thrivalconcepts.com. That's my website. So thrivalconcepts.com will showcase kind of all the actual the deeper dive around the practice of listening and listening intelligence and the executive work I'm doing. And then I also invite people to check out an organization I'm a part of here in Denver called Creative Mornings, which is one of over 205 chapters around the world. And we get to put on a monthly breakfast speaker series inspired by creativity, or really inspiring others to be creative spirited or living creative lives. So those are really my two online locations where you can check out more. And then in terms of how you can support what I'm doing, I would love to hear from those listening on this podcast, really from your vantage as an executive or as a leader assistant. From that vantage point, where is listening most critical in the organization? I'd love to actually maybe in the comments on the podcast eventually, or get in touch with me and just share that particular place in the organization. Curious to hear if it's client services or the internal executive team, or perhaps it's product development, or maybe even just how you're interacting with your marketing message, right, with the end user. So Where in particular is listening most critical in your organization? Just be a great bit of feedback. And then for those listening to the podcast, I put together a special opportunity to take the Echo listening profile, and in conjunction with that, have a 1-hour coaching call with me. Normally I'm charging $250 for that, for the profile and a 1-hour consult. But we have a link available, and those are, I think it's coming up in the show notes, that will reduce the price down to $100. So for $100, understand the Echo profile, your particular Echo profile. Will debrief on that, so you can really become more aware, in particular, of yourself, and then begin to understand how that model can empower you and others around you to understand each other on a deeper level, really, with respect to listening in particular. So, and on that call, we can explore really any particular communication challenge you have that you're faced with, and navigate it a bit. Ask that question of, how do you level up your effectiveness and your communication as a leader assistant, as an executive, but as a leader in the organization. So invite everybody who's interested to jump on that link and get in touch with me there.
Awesome, Dave. Well, I really appreciate you offering that deal. That's a good deal, to take the actual test and get your profile back, and then also have the one-on-one coaching call with you to walk through that. That's awesome. Thanks for doing that. We'll have that link in the show notes along with your website, and how to find out about you. So thanks again for taking time out of your day. And I really find this topic fascinating. Again, we could try to talk about it for a lot longer, but it's a very good snapshot and overview of listening intelligence. And just to remind everybody listening, I think that, and hopefully you're listening with, high value listening, right? So just to remind everybody, this is part of the overall future proofing of our careers, and just kind of going back to being human and educating ourselves, and not just being okay with the computers doing our work and us just kind of having the status quo and just going as things aren't changing or pretending like nothing's happening. This is kind of part of one of the elements of it. So I really encourage everyone to check out thrivalconcepts.com. And again, the link in the show notes for the special offer that Dave's offering. And we will chat with everyone later. Thanks again, Dave, and we'll talk soon.
Jeremy, thanks for the opportunity, and take care, everybody.
Thanks again to my sponsor, Spoonful of Comfort. You can check them out at spoonfulofcomfort.com/leader assistant. And thanks again to Dave for an interesting conversation on listening intelligence. Again, you can check out his special $100 offer where you can take the assessment and get on a coaching call with him, over half price off. It's usually $250, I believe, and it's only $100. You can check that link out and register for that at the show notes site at leaderassistant.com/49. leaderassistant.com/49. Here is to listening well.
Please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com